Hello everyone. So today we have gotten our final Switch 1 Nintendo Direct before the big Switch 2 blowout. And, the response to it is mixed, I guess slightly negative, but there also was a cool couple of surprises of some kind of franchises that have been gone a while. I actually made a video about franchises I wanted to see come back by the time the Switch 2 rolled around, and I mentioned that they would fit the Switch 1 as well as cross-gen games, being, Tomodachi Life and Rhythm Heaven, and we got them. But with 2026 release dates, and that's something I wanted to talk about, is in this Nintendo Direct, did we learn anything about the Switch 2 and the potential Switch 2 Direct happening on April 2nd? And I think so. I think there was a lot of this Direct felt like a bit of paving the way, and it also felt like something they were getting out of the way and something that points to a few key things that we should expect for Switch 2. So for instance, right off the bat, what wasn't in this Nintendo Direct is very enlightening, I believe. So one of the more negative reactions to this Direct is that a lot of people were looking at it and going, aren't we going to get some like first party Nintendo remasters, stuff like that would fill some gaps. If you look at the Switch 1 lineup right now, Metroid Prime 4 is coming out, but no date. And I think the dates are kind of the big talking point here. So no date for Metroid Prime 4, Pokemon ZA, no date, though not necessarily unexpected. I assume it'll be out in November. And then we got Tomodachi Life and Rhythm Heaven 2026, which is pretty far off and kind of surprising to me to see something that far. But that was the kind of the tone of the event, even third party wise, the Dragon Quest remakes and stuff like that. Like no dates was kind of the thing that this Direct was most remembered for, at least in my mind. And that's a bit odd, but I think it tells us quite a bit. So we didn't get any remasters either. And like I said, I know some people that were looking for, hey, maybe some Zelda like Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, one or both of those could be here. Or there have been rumors about Fire Emblem 4 getting a remake. There have been rumors about Kirby Planet Robobot. There have been multiple games that were like, hey, maybe those are like Switch 1 games that are coming out very soon. And they're going to be kind of like, yeah, the Switch 1 is still getting support, but you could play those on Switch 2 as well. But they were nowhere to be seen. And I think that points to something that tells us Nintendo is probably, if it's a very relevant franchise and something that some people might get excited for, they probably are going to do, Switch 2 enhanced versions of games. Whether those are Switch 2 only or just the Switch 2 is like the lead version they use for marketing kind of remains to be seen. But I'm kind of guessing at this point that if, Fire Emblem 4 makes an appearance or some Zelda remasters make an appearance, I'm guessing that they're going to be like, 60 FPS on Switch 2 or 4K or whatever kind of, thing they want to say about the graphics. How we did better lighting, whatever thing they want to do to say that it is better, even if those games do come to Switch, which isn't a guarantee. But if they do come to Switch 1, I have a feeling the Switch 2 is going to be like the lead marketing version. And some people were expecting those games potentially here because they were thinking the Switch 1 would be the lead version and they just would be like, oh, you can play these on Switch 2 as well. Instead, it more looks like Nintendo might be looking at things like that, even if it is just a remaster of like, Wind Waker or something, which is, a Wii U port then brought over to Switch. They're not maybe going to treat it like that when we finally get something like that down the road. We might not get that this year. It might be multiple years from now. But when we do eventually get it, it's not just going to be, oh, here's the Wii U version in 1080p, 30 FPS. They want it to be a little more than that. And that's why they're not focusing on filling out the Switch 1 with that. Because as I said, there are two things that they were announcing as like, new first party games are 2026. So they're not really focused on or worried about filling the lineup in between, the Switch 2 release and those games in 2026. It feels like they're very comfortable if, Metroid Prime, is cross-gen, and then they have Pokemon, they're very comfortable with like that being it. So what I'm saying is I think what this Direct did tell us is the idea that Switch 1 is going to be getting these like filler games is probably not true. But some people were really on board with that. Like, oh, Nintendo's going to have a lot of things to kind of split the gap that are going to be viewed more as Switch 1 games than Switch 2 games. I'm kind of thinking even something like a Wii U game getting a remaster is more going to be treated as a Switch 2 game first and a Switch 1 game second, as opposed to the reverse from a marketing perspective. From a, end user playing perspective, it might not even matter the difference. But that goes with something else that we learned. And I think what's very notable is that Nintendo has actually made an official page for their new virtual game cards announcement. Now, we'll mention that in a second, but this is actually more interesting than the virtual game cards themselves. On the official site, Nintendo posted this: compatible systems must be linked to a Nintendo account to use virtual game cards. Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games and Nintendo Switch 2 edition games can only be loaded on a Nintendo Switch 2 system. That's what I wanted to focus on. Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games, okay, we know what that means. There's no Switch 1 version. But Nintendo Switch 2 edition games is new verbiage that Nintendo hasn't used yet. So there's nothing too crazy there, right? The idea of Switch 2 edition games isn't wild, but it does mean and point to that it's not just going to be a thing where Nintendo views games as this is a Switch 2 game, this is a Switch 1 game, oh, you can play it on Switch 2. This does point to more of they're very comfortable with the idea of cross-gen and a game having separate versions. Now, obviously, there's many ways you can handle separate versions. You can handle it where you buy one game and you get like a license for both. You can pop it in your system physically and download and have access to either, we've seen that on, other consoles. Oh, here's the PS4 version or the PS5 version. On Xbox, it's like automatic, whatever console you have, that's the version you get. It just detects one and gives you that one. PlayStation, you can switch between 4 or 5. But this really points to Nintendo having some sort of cross-gen thing in mind, which to me, again, is not surprising. I expected this, but some people were a little more curious on that. Some people weren't entirely convinced that Nintendo would bridge the gap that way, and they might just be like, this is a last-gen game that you can play on the new system, or this is a next-gen game only. So this goes to what I said, and I think it ties into why those games were absent, or things that could have been here. If there is, certain remasters or something, and they intend on there being a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, then it probably makes sense, if they're not already announced, to hold them and show them in the future. And the Switch 2 can be like the lead marketing platform, but also it's coming out on Switch 1. So instead of, this is a Switch 1 game that's playable on Switch 2 as well. So I actually think this is a good thing. The negative thing would be if they really lean on like selling them separately, even like physically. You don't want to see Nintendo have like Switch 2, games of like a Switch 1 game that just came out for full price and you can't upgrade to it if you own it on Switch 1. A lot of games like PS4 to PS5, there were at least either a game would automatically get upgraded if they wanted to, or there would be a small, $10 upgrade fee or something. You don't want to see like games be entirely separate if that charges more for like older games. But for new games, I think that's actually a good thing. Because like I said, I was going to be actually someone who was quite disappointed if Fire Emblem or Zelda or any of these games had games come out in 2025 or later, but they played in Switch 1 mode on my Switch 2, like if that's all they were. I want higher resolutions and stuff than that if I buy a Switch 2. And if they're already gonna have a specific, name for that, then to me that says we should expect cross-gen versions of games and not just last-gen games in back compat mode, which is better because that means they'll make, higher quality versions of the games. The other thing we learned, the virtual game cards, we already have some sort of transfer system, or we already have a way to like share games. If you let someone else like have like login details, you can have a home Switch, like a primary one and another one. And then if you have like login details, if you put that account on each system, like you can share between. It does look like there's a fine print that where it's like an opt-in thing, an opt-in or opt-out in terms of using the game card system. And the game card system seems more for people who are local. They want you to share with someone who's literally right there. And then you don't need to have your account on that person's system at all, which is, technically nice. It's safer. But so yeah, if you're family and you're right there, maybe you do that. But anyone who shares with someone long distance, it doesn't really help you at all. So it is what it is. Technically, if you own a Switch 1 and Switch 2, you could, because they said it works between generations, you could just use that yourself. It seems very specific for, almost feels like I picture siblings who have two Switch 2s, but they don't like having separate accounts, or you don't like being logged in, having to log into someone else's. You want everything, tracked on your own account, that kind of thing. We don't know if any Nintendo will change anything about maybe with the way you unlock stuff. Maybe there'll be some sort of, if not achievement system, it doesn't have to be like that, but some sort of, Nintendo tracker, whether it's playtime or there's things to do, maybe that's tied to a profile. Maybe it's hard tied to an account and you don't want to share that with someone else. I don't know. We'll see. I don't think it's super crazy useful, but it does seem like you don't even have to use it. So we'll see how that goes. But one more thing that is very relevant for Switch 2 is Nintendo did put the... Another thing about the Switch 2 that we got to see today is related to Nintendo Today. That is the name of their new app that they said will be sharing news daily, little posts, could just be art, could be very simple things. Obviously, nothing's not something significant every single day, but it's their own little social thing. And they did mention, for Switch 2, when the Direct happens, they will be posting stuff about Switch 2 every day. Probably just little development tidbits of certain games they show. But one thing we see is an image of the Nintendo Switch 2 on that Nintendo Today app. And that image does have a very clear view of a button with the letter C on it. So the C button has been leaked for a real long time. It's been talked to just be like maybe a social thing, some sort of way to access chat. Some people have said it has, more advanced functions. It's been a little all over the place. There've kind of been multiple rumors about it without hard confirmation. But in the trailer Nintendo did for the first Nintendo Switch 2 video, it was they didn't show it. It wasn't a clear C on there. So in a way, they've kind of played coy on this thing. And this is just a good image of it. It shows they're comfortable people like having hard confirmation, I guess, at this point of the C, even though we already knew it was going to happen. But, obviously this means at that April 2nd Switch 2 Direct, they're going to go into it. And if they were kind of hiding it before, but now showing it in this Nintendo Today app, it doesn't mean to them they thought it was interesting enough to kind of be secretive on it. So we'll see if it ends up doing more than some people think. One other thing that I think we may have learned from this Direct is when they showed the game cards system, the virtual game card system, they used it showing Mii's. And of course, we got Tomodachi Life come out in 2026 as a Switch 1 game. But since it's in 2026 and we know Switch 2 Edition, I assume it'll be labeled as such. Of course, it doesn't really matter. A game like that, a game like Rhythm Heaven, they don't even really need Switch 2 editions because graphically and stuff, they're meant to be like more casual games. They're not, they art style wise look more like their 3DS counterparts. Like they don't really need a Switch 2 edition, but since it's 2026, they probably will be labeled as such on the eShop or something if Nintendo is going to differentiate. And with Tomodachi Life being a 2026 game and them, busting out the Mii's here to show virtual game cards, and they mentioned sharing between generations as well, I think it does confirm that, potentially Mii's might be noticeable. I know some people wondered, like every generation they seem to de-emphasize it. Remember Switch Sports? Some people it was kind of controversial that they were kind of leaning away from the Mii's so much. And some people were like, are they going to phase them out entirely? I don't think so. I think this kind of confirms that maybe even like a Mii creator will be more front and center on Switch 2. We'll have to wait and see to be sure, but it doesn't seem like they're running away from the ideas of Mii's. And the only other thing I would like to say is I do think the fact that we got so few dates does point to, like Metroid Prime 4 just saying 2025. I think on April 2nd we get that release date. I'm still going with it being a launch game. I do think that if Mario Kart's a launch game, as I and many people expect, maybe they separate them by like a month or something as well, right? Nintendo, if you think about like Breath of the Wild and like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe or something, it was kind of like a month and a half or so, a month and some change, a little under 2. So, maybe they try to do that strategy of like spreading things out so like you have a game every month to look forward to. It's hard to say for sure, but either way, I do expect Metroid Prime 4 to, if not be a day one game, be very close to day one. And that's why we didn't get a date. I don't think it's because the game is, a holiday game. It's still long off. Another thing that I think is interesting is when I mentioned those remasters and how it potentially could mean that those remasters are, if they're in development, they could be coming to, Switch 1, Switch 2, and maybe Switch 2 is just the lead marketing because they want to be like, hey, we've never had a 4K version of this or blah, 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 or 60 FPS. This game's never been at that, and it can't run at that on Switch. So they lead with the Switch 2 version because it looks better in trailers. There's another way to look at that, and it might be maybe some of those remasters don't even exist, but those franchises could make an appearance at the Switch 2 Direct, meaning they don't want new, Kirby information or new Zelda information, Fire Emblem, etc. in this Direct because they want to announce something else. No, I'm not saying specifically this would happen, but if you announce Wind Waker, Twilight Princess port coming to Switch, that's weird to have Zelda news if they have other Zelda news at the Switch 2 event that might not have anything to do with that. Obviously, I know we're not getting like a new Zelda and possibly just like an update, maybe like a Switch 2 edition of Breath of the Wild, hopefully for free or very cheap upgrade, but, / Tears of the Kingdom. But you never know. Maybe no Zelda news for even remasters could mean they do have a bigger Zelda announcement. Maybe, the dream of like an Ocarina of Time remake or something could happen. Same thing related to, rumors about Kirby and a Planet Robobot remaster or something. Maybe Switch 2 does have a new Kirby announcement and Planet Robobot is coming, but they don't want like Kirby news a week apart because they want people to, see the new Switch 2 announcement and then they'll announce Planet Robobot randomly, in a couple months or something, right? But they don't want it right now, because they have news related to a major new entry on Switch 2, so they're holding off. And that goes for Fire Emblem, anything. Any franchise that wasn't here that people thought maybe could get a smaller game or get a remaster, maybe it's pointing to either a full new game for Switch 2 or a bigger remake and not just like a remaster port in the works. And they don't want to kind of flood the channels with news of those franchises. They want, full impact when they reveal a bigger thing at the Switch 2 event. So I think all those franchises that were absent, because I've seen some like Fire Emblem fans be salty, I honestly think it's good news. If a game or a franchise you care about wasn't here, I really think it's good news if they're saving that for Switch 2. Because again, some of those games could come to Switch 1 if they are a little smaller or less ambitious. But that might mean they're just aiming a little higher and they're going to have a Switch 2 option as well. Or it could mean a bigger game than you even were imagining because it is a full Switch 2 game. So we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the recent Nintendo Direct. Only 1 week out from the Switch 2 Direct. Some people are down on it, but I really think when you have a next-gen console event a week later, it really doesn't matter. And I honestly think some of the stuff that's absent could be pointing to some actually good news. Like it might be a good sign. The lower your opinion on this, it might actually mean the higher your opinion is going to end up on the Switch 2 Direct. So yeah, I overall am very excited for next week. I think April 2nd, Nintendo's going to have a great show. What did you think of this Direct? And if so, do you think anything is hinting towards the Switch 2 Direct? If you have any thoughts, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time.